Your grandmother did not have a cottage food license. She did not have a ginseng dealer permit. She did not file a controlled burn notification with the Missouri Department of Conservation. She did not register her beehives with the state. She did not consult a county health department before using her spring. She did not apply for a composting toilet variance. She did not check whether her rainwater collection system was legal in neighboring states. She just did what the land required and what her mother had taught her and what her mother's mother had taught before that. She fed her family, preserved food for winter, used the plants that grew around her hollow for medicine, and ran a household that would have survived without a single utility bill or a single government approval. Most of what she did is either still legal in Missouri, legal with caveats, or in a legal gray area that the government has not fully resolved. Some of it has since been regulated, restricted, or outright prohibited. All 27 of these tricks still work. The legal status of each one is more complicated than your grandmother ever had reason to think about. Subscribe right now. Hit the button and the bell. Making moonshine for personal use. Missouri Statute 311.055 explicitly states that no person at least 21 years of age shall be required to obtain a license to manufacture intoxicating liquor for personal or family use. That is Missouri state law in plain English. Federal law, administered by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, takes a different position. Unlicensed distilling is illegal under federal statute regardless of the quantity or the purpose. The result is a genuine conflict between state and federal law that has never been fully resolved in the courts. Your grandfather distilled under state law. Federal law disagrees. The still in the hollow still works. Raw milk from a farm. Missouri law permits a producer to sell raw milk directly to a consumer at the farm. You can drive to a Missouri dairy farm today and buy unpasteurized milk legally. What you cannot do is buy it at a grocery store, a farmer's market, or any location other than the farm itself. The milk your grandmother drank straight from the cow without pasteurization is legal to purchase in Missouri if you go to the farm. It is illegal to sell it anywhere else. The FDA considers raw milk a significant public health risk. Ozarks families who drank it for generations seem to have survived the experience. Rainwater collection. This one surprises most people. Collecting rainwater is completely legal in Missouri. It is legal in most states now, though Colorado and Utah maintained restrictions until relatively recently, and a handful of states still limit collection quantities. Your grandfather put barrels under the eaves and used the water for the garden, the animals, and occasionally the house. No permit required. No license required. Still legal. Still works. Building a structure without permits in rural Missouri. Most rural Missouri counties have no building codes. A homesteader in Shannon County or Ozark County or Oregon County can construct outbuildings, barns, root cellars, and in many cases dwelling structures without a building permit because no building permit requirement exists at the county level. The exception is septic systems. Missouri requires an approved septic installation for any structure with indoor plumbing. Your grandfather built what he needed where he needed it, without filing paperwork because in most of the rural Ozarks, there was no paperwork to file and there still is not. Using a spring without testing it. Missouri law does not require rural landowners to test their private spring or well water before drinking it. The Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services recommends testing. The recommendation is not a requirement. Ozarks families drank from cold, clear springs for generations and understood the water quality through direct observation. The presence of cavefish, the clarity, the smell, the behavior of the animals that drank from the same source. Testing is wise. The spring still works without it. Controlled burns without notification. Burning to clear brush and manage pasture was as routine as any other farm practice in the Ozarks. Missouri currently requires landowners to notify the Missouri Department of Conservation before conducting prescribed burns and recommends a burn permit during certain conditions. The notification requirement is recent in historical terms. Your grandfather burned when the conditions were right without notifying a state agency because the state agency expecting notification was not yet part of how rural land management worked in his era. Missouri saw more than 224 wildfires burn over 15,500 acres in a single week in March 2025, which is part of why the notification requirements exist. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this story matters. Slaughtering your own livestock at home. Butchering a hog, a steer, or dish chickens on your own property for your own family's consumption is completely legal in Missouri. Selling that meat requires USDA inspection and licensing. The line between legal and illegal is the sale. Personal consumption is permitted, commercial sale is regulated. Your grandfather butchered his own animals because he raised them, fed them, and needed them to feed his family. That practice is still entirely legal. What has changed is the assumption that you would also be selling to your neighbors, which has been regulated out of common practice in most communities. Herbal medicine preparation, collecting plants from your own land, drying them, making tinctures and teas and poultices, and using them to treat your family's illnesses is completely legal. Your grandmother knew which plants reduced fever, which ones helped with respiratory problems, which ones treated wounds. She did not have a medical license. She did not need one for personal and family use. Selling those preparations as medicine without FDA registration is where the law becomes involved. The knowledge itself is unrestricted. Boneset, elderberry, plantain, black cohosh, golden seal, yarrow. The Ozarks pharmacopoeia that sustained families for generations is still growing in the hollows. Graywater recycling, using sink and laundry water to irrigate the garden rather than sending it to a septic system, is not specifically regulated in most rural Missouri counties. Your grandmother threw the wash water on the vegetable garden. The nutrients in it fed the soil. Rural Missouri counties that lack building codes generally lack graywater regulations too. Urban municipalities are a different story. In rural Ozarks hollows, recycling household water through the garden is still entirely practical. Rendering lard at home. Collecting and rendering the fat from a hog you raised into cooking lard is legal for personal use. Selling it requires licensing under Missouri cottage food laws. The lard your grandmother rendered and packed into crocks lasted through winter without refrigeration in a cool root cellar. The process has not changed. The chemistry has not changed. The legal status for personal use has not changed. What has changed is that most people no longer know how to do it. Beekeeping without registering your hives. Missouri requires all beekeepers to register their hives with the Missouri Department of Agriculture and pay a small registration fee. This requirement exists to allow the state to track and respond to colony collapse, varroa mite infestations, and disease outbreaks that can devastate honeybee populations regionally. Your grandfather kept bees without registering them because no registration requirement existed. The requirement is now real, the fee is nominal, and the hives still work exactly as they always did. Ginseng harvesting. Missouri regulates ginseng harvesting under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Ginseng can be harvested from September 1st through December 31st. Minimum root size rules apply. Landowner permission is required on private land. Missouri requires ginseng dealers to be licensed. Your grandfather harvested ginseng as a significant cash crop from the forest floor when the price was good, without permits or season restrictions or minimum size requirements, because the regulatory framework governing wild ginseng did not exist yet. The roots still grow in the same hollows and still bring real money. Smoke curing meat. Building a smokehouse and hanging your own bacon, ham, and sausage to cure in hardwood. Smoke is legal for personal use without any permit or license in rural Missouri. Selling smoked meat requires inspection and licensing. The smokehouse your grandfather built and used every fall after butchering season is still a legal structure on a rural Missouri property. The technique still produces food that keeps through winter without refrigeration when done correctly. What has become unusual is not the legality, it is the knowledge. Saving and selling seeds from open-pollinated varieties. Saving seeds from your own open-pollinated or heirloom vegetables and trading or selling them to neighbors is legal. What is not legal without a license is saving and replanting patented hybrid or genetically modified seeds. Seed patent law, enforced vigorously by large agricultural companies, prohibits replanting patented varieties without paying the license fee. Your grandmother saved seeds from every productive plant in the garden as a matter of survival. Seeds for tomatoes, beans, corn, squash, saved in paper envelopes through winter. That practice is still legal for open-pollinated varieties and is experiencing a significant revival in the Ozarks as more people recognize the value of what was nearly lost. Making cider vinegar. Fermenting apple cider into vinegar using a raw, unpasteurized mother culture is legal for personal use without any permit or license. Selling it requires cottage food licensing under Missouri law. Your grandmother's crock of apple cider vinegar that sat on the shelf and served as both a food ingredient and a home remedy did not require government approval to make. It still does not. Home cheese. Making cheese from milk produced on your own farm for personal and family consumption is legal. Selling it requires a Missouri Department of Agriculture permit and compliance with dairy regulations. Your grandmother made cottage cheese, butter, and soft cheeses from the milk her dairy cow produced without a permit or an inspection because the regulatory structure that now covers dairy product sales did not apply to what she was doing, which was feeding her family. Collecting wild medicinal plants, harvesting golden seal, black cohosh, bloodroot, and other medicinal plants for personal use is legal with landowner permission on private land. Some species have become regulated for commercial collection because overharvesting has significantly reduced wild populations. Golden seal, once common throughout Ozarks forests, has declined substantially due to demand from the herbal medicine market. Your grandmother walked the forest and collected what she needed. The plants are still there in the hollows where the deer don't browse too heavily and the canopy stays dense enough to keep the soil cool. Root cellar construction. Digging and constructing a root cellar on your rural Missouri property requires no permit in most unincorporated Ozarks counties. The earthen root cellar that kept vegetables, canned goods, and dairy products through winter without electricity was standard Ozarks Homestead infrastructure. The design has not improved significantly since your grandmother's version. Constant underground temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees, high humidity, and darkness produce exactly the storage conditions that keep root vegetables, apples, and preserved foods viable for months. The physics of the earth have not changed. The permits required to dig into it in most of rural Missouri have not changed either. They are still not required. Wood ash lye soap. Leaching wood ash with rainwater to produce lye, then combining the lye with rendered animal fat in a process that requires careful chemistry and even more careful handling of a caustic substance, produces soap that cleaned Ozarks families for generations before commercial soap was affordable or accessible in the deep hollows. The process works. It has always worked. Making it for personal use is completely legal. Selling it requires a soap producer license in Missouri. The wood ash still works. The rendered lard still works. The chemistry is the same as it has always been. Using leg hold traps. Missouri allows leg hold traps with a valid trapping license. The same traps that Ozarks grandfathers used to supplement income and manage predators are legal in Missouri today. They are banned outright in several states and heavily restricted in others. An Ozarks grandfather who trapped muskrat along the creek for the fur price in winter was doing something that remains legal in Missouri with the appropriate license. A distinction that would surprise him, given how many places have since decided it should not be legal at all. Foraging mushrooms. Collecting morel mushrooms, chanterelles, hen of the woods, and other edible wild fungi from the Ozarks forests for personal consumption, is legal on your own property without restriction. On national forest land within the Ozarks, personal use foraging for reasonable quantities is generally permitted. Commercial foraging requires a permit. The morel season in the Missouri Ozarks is one of the most anticipated events in the spring calendar for families who have known exactly which hillsides produce reliable crops for generations. That knowledge, passed from grandparent to grandchild, is worth considerably more than anything you can learn from a map. Making apple butter, cooking down apples with cider and spices in a copper kettle over an open fire until the mixture reaches the specific dark amber consistency that preserves it through winter without refrigeration, is a process that requires no permit for personal use. Selling it requires cottage food licensing. The apple butter your grandmother made in October and put up in canning jars is still legal to make, still practical, and still significantly better than anything sold in a store. Building a root spring house, constructing a small stone or concrete structure over a cold water spring that keeps the spring's output between 40 and 55 degrees year-round as a natural refrigerator is legal on your own property in rural Missouri without a building permit in most counties. Ozarks families kept dairy products, meat, and beverages cold in spring houses for generations before electric refrigeration reached the hills. The spring house is simply an insulated room with moving cold water in the floor. The physics work because the geology of the Ozarks is unchanged. Tapping maple trees. Missouri has sugar maple in the northern Ozarks counties and silver maple throughout the region. Tapping trees on your own property to collect sap for syrup production is legal without any permit or license. Selling the syrup requires cottage food licensing. Your grandfather knew which trees ran sweetest and which orientation produced the best sap flow in late winter. That knowledge does not require a permit. The trees are still producing. 27 tricks, some fully legal, some legal with caveats, some in gray areas between state and federal law, some regulated in ways that would have surprised the grandparents who practiced them before the regulations arrived. All of them still work. All of them still produce food, medicine, and shelter more reliably than most people who have never needed to know them realize. The Ozarks preserve this knowledge because the Ozarks preserve the culture that produced it. Most of it is not in books. Most of it is in the people who are still here and the ones who learned from people who are not. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell. Drop a comment. Which of these did your family practice? Because the number of Ozarkers who grew up doing these things and assumed they were gone is smaller than the number who actually kept doing them when nobody was looking. Thank you for watching. The truth doesn't shout. It waits for you to look closer.